Hey Seekers, and welcome back. I'm your host Julienne Irons, and this episode is a companion to our Science of the Father Wound conversation with Joshua Rivedal and Dr. Burgos. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, you may want to start there first, since this conversation builds on the themes we explored in Josh's story. Now, before recording that episode, we gathered some thoughtful questions from our listeners about their relationships with their fathers. So in this bonus conversation, Dr. Burgos joins me again to help walk through those questions from a trauma-informed neuroscience perspective. Seekers, this conversation isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about understanding the deeper nervous system patterns that can shape it, so we can begin shifting what happens next. This is Perspective Shifts for Healing with the Hanged Woman, where perspective is power. Let's get into it. Hey Seekers, if you're building a business and something feels off, like you're doing all the right things, but the momentum still isn't there, it might not just be a strategy problem. At 3 of Cups Healing, we offer intuitive marketing solutions using tarot, energy healing, and heart-centered creative guidance. Because the way you feel in your business shapes how you show up, how you make decisions, and how you grow. We help emerging business owners turn inner alignment into outward momentum, so your business can grow with more ease, clarity, and intention. Seekers, if you're ready to build your business in a way that actually feels supportive, book a free consultation with us at 3ofcupshealing.com. Your vision, your magic. Let's make it real. Together. That's 3ofcupshealing.com. And now, back to the episode. Dr. Burgos, thank you so much for answering some of our listener questions. We had a bunch come back. Before we dive into these listener questions, is there anything that you want us to know as we work through them?
Okay. So as we begin to answer these questions, I'm going to put on my trauma-informed neuroscience hat, and I'm going to let you borrow one for you too.
Thank you.
Because these questions are very deeply personal, what happens when it's like really deep, sometimes we can trigger our survival mode. And so let's take a deep breath, y'all. And throughout this conversation, if anything rings true for you, find your breath. If something is completely not true for you, find your breath. Just go back to take a deep breath.
Thank you so much for that. So let's dive into the first questions. The first one is, why did my dad resort to alcohol when things didn't go his way and he neglected me?
Okay, so alcohol is one of the most common self-medication tools for an overactive sympathetic nervous system, which is an overactive survival mode. So if your dad grew up in chaos, if he felt powerless as a child, if he was shamed for vulnerability, and if he learned that men don't feel, then sometimes emotional stress can activate our survival mode as an adult. And think back to the part of the brain called the amygdala. So normally, my amygdala is able to notice something stressful, and it sends that information to the prefrontal cortex, and they have a conversation, and I can problem solve thoughtfully. But if I'm in a state of survival and old survival mechanism nervous system settings, then the amygdala part of the brain is so dominant that it does not share the information. It like hoards the information and it says nobody else can make any decisions. We are in threat detection mode. It is time to survive. So this is kind of like when a level 2 problem feels like a level 7 problem. So the amygdala is hyperactive. And this also triggers the shame circuit that we learned in childhood that persists into adulthood. And it also triggers, because it's the survival mode nervous system, it triggers a spike in the hormone cortisol. Although it may seem like the world might be kind of ordinary and our parent is turning to alcohol during what might seem like a regular day, that is a sign that their nervous system is super overstimulated. It cannot handle a basic day. Alcohol temporarily decreases the amygdala dominance. That means it temporarily helps us feel safe. It suppresses the prefrontal overthinking, the part of us that is constantly in internal conflict about what I should do, who I am, why do I have shame? Why do I have guilt? I'm a bad person. You're a bad person. Everything sucks. So that part that just keeps thinking, it slows it down, right? And alcohol also creates an artificial parasympathetic relaxation. What I mean is, so remember, in the nervous system, we have the survival mode and we have the opposite, which is like relaxation, calm, focused awareness. But as we all know, alcohol is like liquid courage, y'all. Why? Because it kind of helps us to slow down and not feel things so deeply. We kind of feel a little bit more free. So it creates an artificial relaxation. But you're not. You're still in survival mode. But it just feels different. Like the heart rate slows down, the breathing slows down. You don't feel like you have to rush anywhere. You feel like you can just sit. To a traumatized nervous system, alcohol feels like relief. Neglect often follows because when a parent is dysregulated, the brain prioritizes self-preservation over connection. Let that land. That one is tough. Connection requires the nervous system to feel safe. And addiction is usually a coping mechanism within survival mode. Why did my dad resort to alcohol when things didn't go his way and neglected me? Because it was the only way his nervous system could get by that day. And this is in his own perception. Think back to the memoir and the conversation with Josh. In the beginning of his journey, there is no way in hell he would accept deep breathing, write out your thoughts, go see a therapist. No, because you're in the wound. Right now, in the survival mind, everything is rigid. There's no other way to go about this because this is how I have survived my whole life. Now, for us looking back at our parent who neglected us, from our nervous system, we're like, dude, it's easy. Just like talk with me. Let's just chat. But from our safe nervous system, it's possible, but not from a nervous system in survival. So imagine you just ran out of a burning building. And as you're coming out and you're coughing and you can't think right and your heart rate is fast and you don't even know who you are or where you're at, but you just had to run to get out of there. And as soon as you make it to the sidewalk, somebody is like, can you tell me about a time that you felt love in your childhood? It's not exactly the right moment, right? So we can see this, if somebody did run out of a building, it obviously, right? It just is not the right time. However, I think in society, we are still learning that mental health issues and diseases are just as valid as like cancer. So if we had somebody in a hospital going through chemotherapy, what would we expect from them might be different than when they're feeling good. It's kind of the same when we have someone with a severe mental health crisis. It's just hard to see that because on the surface, they look like they're themselves. And it hurts when we're children because we are perceiving this as, I'm not valuable enough for your attention. This hurts to even like start to process. But when we start to realize that it wasn't available in their survival nervous system, then maybe there's just a little bit of compassion. And like, we had talked about with Josh, like this does not make certain behaviors okay. It doesn't mean it disappears. It just means, oh, now I understand why you neglected me. It doesn't make it okay. But now I kind of have a little bit of understanding that kind of helps my pain dissipate a little bit. Because when we're children, we feel like the reason our parent does something is because something is wrong with us. And we carry that into adulthood. And so once I let you know, like, actually, you had nothing to do with his reaction to you, then it's like your inner child can realize, oh, that had nothing to do with me. And there's a little bit of relief in that.
Okay, so the second question is, why did my dad think we loved our mom more than him?
So this sounds like the dad's insecure attachment style from his childhood. It's part of his survival mechanism. So if he had abandonment trauma, emotional neglect in childhood, and I'm talking from the age of 0 to 2, like this is when all this is programmed. If he had conditional love experiences, like you must behave well in order to get a hug from me, then he may have had an anxious attachment style. An anxious attachment style interprets neutral behavior as rejection. So it's the toddler in him that is feeling rejected all over again, because that's when this was programmed. Closeness to others feels like threat. Because remember, in surviving this type of trauma, perhaps, other people were not safe, and feeling close never felt good. So closeness can feel like threat. Unfortunately, sometimes that closeness includes their own children, and that's a tough one to kind of process. But if you're a parent, you might understand what I'm saying. Let's just get real. Sometimes I don't need my 2-year-old next to me. Let's just say that. Sometimes I'm like, go to your daddy.
Yeah.
Go that way. I reach points where I'm so overstimulated from whatever has happened. And I practice, checking in with myself so that I don't, blow up in front of my toddler. But there are times when I just tell my husband, I'm not available right now, and I just have to leave the room. It's not that I don't want to be with my 2-year-old. It's that it does signal threat to my nervous system because I'm about to not be okay. And I would hope that my toddler will learn that it's okay for mommy to have space, and it would be in my desire that I'm available to share, hey, mommy just needs like 10 minutes or whatever. And that's the part of our cultural awareness that is kind of new in our generation. Our parents didn't have those tools.
Right. Yeah.
To like check in with themselves and like to consider, the feelings of babies and kids. This is kind of a new thing. And so we're watching our new perspective start to interpret the past. Also, autonomy for this anxious attachment that may have been part of this father's childhood, autonomy could have signaled abandonment. Remember when Josh, in his memoir, went to hyper independence? He became independent very early on, and that's how he survived. But for this other parent that we're talking about now, being independent was actually, it felt like I have to be independent, but I feel like I'm abandoned. Like they don't want to be independent. They don't want that autonomy. They want the closeness. And so that's why it's kind of like mixed signals in people's behavior now that we're able to look back. So his brain may have genuinely misread reality. What we're learning today is that trauma can change our perception. And the amygdala doesn't ask, is this true? The amygdala will say, why am I being left alone? I hope that brings some clarity.
Okay, so up next we have why did he choose his new wife over his daughters, which I read as why did he choose his new family over his old family?
So we see this often. Adults unconsciously gravitate toward relationships that recreate early attachment dynamics that feel familiar, even if they are unhealthy, and that because it was a survival mode, it helps regulate their nervous system. This is kind of like when we have parents with a dysfunctional marriage and then we grow up and we get into a relationship and we recreate the same dysfunction, but it's also what we're familiar with, and it feels okay because, oh, I know how to deal with this. Okay, so this is kind of the same thing. So now a new partner can feel for this person like validation. A new partner can feel like redemption because it's a new part of your life where you don't have all the reminders of this shame and guilt and trauma and just pain. It feels like starting over. There's a little sense of relief in that. And it feels like this is proof that I'm worthy. So this is really tough to be on the other end of, because children unfortunately can sometimes activate parts of the parent's nervous system that the parent associates with guilt and failure and shame, reminders of a past identity. So avoidance of children can sometimes be avoidance of shame. This is not justification. This is just an idea of what might be happening. And of course, the only person who really knows the answer is the father in this question. And maybe there's a possibility for asking gentle questions one day if it's available to both people.
Another question we got is why did my father show up late to the funeral or not help in the planning of it when it comes to a lost sibling?
When a serious crisis like this happens, someone passes away, all of our brains go right into survival mode and like a state of grief, right? Now, everyone handles grief very differently. And a lot of that is based on our old survival mechanisms. As we saw in the grief episode, the neuroscience of grief, if anyone's listening, go back and listen to that one between Julienne and I. Grief activates this circuitry in the brain that could activate panic. And remember, in attachment theory, we need connection with someone. And if that connection is destroyed, it can cause an existential fear. And if we have unresolved trauma, a funeral can trigger a lot of old or present survival mechanisms that can also harm the family. Some of this includes dissociation, avoidance, emotional shutdown, substance relapse, and time blindness from being overwhelmed. Like if you just disconnect and days went by and you're not even in tune with what day it is anymore of the week. And so avoidance is a trauma response. Some people withdraw from grief because feeling it would collapse everything that they think is safe. It would collapse their defenses. And the brain might do this for us because it doesn't want us to have a mental breakdown.
The next question is, why didn't my father ever try to build a relationship with me even when I became an adult?
Let's consider the attachment theory and the different styles. Let's consider Josh's memoir. The attachment style that he had that included avoidance, that was part of his survival mechanism because his nervous system could not handle being close or intimacy or feeling like it is exposed. And this is really tough to kind of process when it's like our own parent. And this ability to self-reflect, like I should build a relationship with you now when I have a chance, that ability to self-reflect requires a certain part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, to be strong enough to make those decisions. And as we mentioned, in the previous conversation with Josh, it requires practice, not just with practice building relationships, but practice doing things that strengthen our ability for critical thinking instead of being in survival mode and always reacting. So if someone has chronic shame, avoids introspection, uses distraction like work, alcohol, different defense mechanisms, and if they never learned emotional literacy, then it's possible that relationship repair feels terrifying. And I can even say this from my own experience. The first time I had to apologize to my husband, I was like, dang, for me to apologize means I have to admit what I did.
Yeah.
And I have to like verbalize it and say it. And then part of me doesn't want to see that part of me exists.
Ooh, yeah, I feel that. I can resonate with that.
Okay. So repair is just easier for me to just like, he'll get over it. He'll be all right. And sometimes we could do this as a parent. We do this as a human being because it feels so like vulnerable and exposing if I go there. And also learning how to repair a relationship, that happens in childhood, right? Like when I overstep with my 2-year-old and I realize it and I'm like, dang, I shouldn't have done that. I teach him what to say back to me. Like the other day, he was busy doing something and he was so focused. And I just came and like smuggled him with kisses and I didn't ask him if I could give him a hug. I just went in for it. And he never once took his eyes off of whatever he was focused on. And then it hit me like, D, this is not the time. And also he's not into it right now. So then I taught him to say, Mommy, I need space right now. And that is him learning to manage relationship conflict at 2 years old. If this wasn't available for our parents, then yeah, relationship repair can feel terrifying because repair requires, like I said, admitting harm, feeling guilt without your nervous system collapsing, staying regulated during confrontation. Now that's a tough one. Let's go back to the example of being my husband, of me being like, dang, I need to admit this. And he might have some words for me, but it might be easier if I avoid that confrontation. And like, how can I make sure I don't get defensive even though he's right? Dang, right? So that does require some skill on my part. Okay. So that skill, it's difficult if repair is terrifying. And repair also requires holding space for complexity. When we are in survival mode, we are very much black and white thinking. Our perception becomes narrow and it's like, I'm right, you're wrong, us versus them. But in reality, most of the time that we can problem solve with critical thinking, we can realize that there's many moving parts. There's many factors. There's, okay, if you see it from this way, you can get this. If you see it from another way, like there's flexibility in kind of understanding a situation, but that's not quite available when you're in survival mode. Okay. So this is what I shared is it's an advanced neurological skill. And many adults never develop that. to be able to stay okay when you have to admit that you did something that's not cool, and also to not get defensive and to be like, dang, that's true, and to feel compassion for the other person, even though you just low-key did something jacked up out of your own defense.
Okay, so up next is why did my father think that daughters are useless?
I think this is a cultural, societal belief system that's not just present in the United States, but in many parts of the world. So if we connect it with that knowledge, this could be connected to patriarchal conditioning. It's possible that this father's father treated any sister siblings, like, as Josh said, second-class citizens, as, oh, they don't bring money in, they can't do, farm work, they can't do heavy lifting, we need to work, 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 and they're not helpful. And like, we have too many daughters, maybe we don't need that much cooking. Do you see, like, if I have a narrow perspective of someone's purpose and function, then it's like, dang, we need some balance. And that's how they might see it, from that kind of old school perspective. And it's definitely hurtful. Doesn't mean it's okay. But if we're trying to understand, like, this is multi-generational trauma showing up in the present. And it's also, like, kind of what I alluded to earlier, socioeconomic survival thinking. So in some eras and cultures, sons equated to labor, lineage, financial security, especially for the parents when they get older, right? And daughters were kind of an economic burden. Like, what's this thing about the dowry? Like, when my daughter gets married, I have to give somebody like thousands of dollars. Like, this idea, this cultural idea of like giving away a daughter as property, and then like somebody's gonna get paid for it. Yeah. So like that old belief system could be a subconscious factor. Does not make it okay. If this person's nervous system equated survival with material security, daughters may have unconsciously registered as a threat to status, because I'm going to be broke. I'm going to be broke. And another thing in our society that we focus on is, or that men feel, that is a societal thing that we create, that their function is financial and not emotional.
Okay, up next is why did my dad compare me to others and force achievement on me without giving me any emotional support?
This pattern is very common in emotionally deprived parents. And as we alluded to in the last question, masculinity comes into question when emotions and vulnerability are part of someone's process. So like, I actually wanted to ask this to Josh, which is, he very masterfully shows that masculinity includes all of what makes you authentic, including your vulnerability and including your ability to be helpful also to other men who don't have emotional language to turn to understand themselves. Like, Josh is great. He went from one side of the spectrum, not all the way to the other, but he went right to the middle where there's balance of what I believe is like a masculine stereotype and a feminine stereotype. The masculine part, I think, is our function in the world as men, what people see. And I think that the feminine stereotype is like, how am I doing inside? And the truth is, we need both. This is emerging in our society right now. And Josh showed how his father was very much on one side of masculinity, and how he himself had to discover that to be authentic, it included checking in with himself internally. So if this father in question, why compare me and force achievement without emotional support? He may have received love only when he was achieving. This actually sounds like what many men describe as their own childhood, of like, you better achieve, do better than your friend, and like, don't cry about it. There's no time. While we're surviving, you better just do your best because we're all counting on you. That brain could see performance as safety. They could see achievement as belonging in society and in family. They can see failure as rejection. So he passed down what he knew. He may have believed, I'm making you strong, but no one taught him that strength without tuning in to your nervous system, to your emotions, how you're doing internally, that just becomes anxiety. It does not become resilience.
All right, up next is why did my father love me but put my mother down in front of me?
What I am hearing from this is an insecure masculinity, dominance modeling from possibly his own father, low relationship self-esteem, and externalizing shame. Okay, go back to the example of me and my husband. When I did something jacked up, and now for me to repair this, I have to confront that I actually did that and be vulnerable. Or I could just continue to criticize him publicly and stand my ground. That's the defense part coming up in survival mode. So now, for this parent who's doing this, they criticize someone like their spouse publicly. It reflects projection. Look that up, y'all, projection. It reflects a need for power because I don't feel good inside, so I'm going to reach for it outside. And it reflects a fear of being inadequate. Like with me and my husband in this example of like, dang, can I actually face what I did? I feel inadequate. I don't think I can do that. So there is a fear of facing that, which is a normal human thing, but it feels like my manhood is on the line. Okay. So children in this dynamic experience role confusion. Like, do I align more with dad or do I align more with mom? And that is attachment splitting. Look that up. It wires hypervigilance into the child's nervous system because you're constantly trying to evaluate like which way you're going to go, towards mom or towards dad.
Okay, the next question is, does my father have abandonment trauma?
That's tough to imagine after we just talked about like attachment styles and like toddlerhood. I felt something inside when you said that of like, that's a 2-year-old. Does my father have abandonment trauma? Yeah, probably. Like, that's such a great question that it's probably right. And the moment I think about that, I imagine my father as a 2-year-old and like what would trauma be like for my son and how I could never possibly do that. But my grandfather probably, I mean, from the stories I've heard, was extremely violent. And like, if that love attachment isn't there, then the survival mechanism could perceive a lot as abandonment. Like, my dad never thought I was good enough, so I feel abandoned. And like that carries on for life. So some common signs of abandonment trauma is jealousy of the children's closeness to their mother. That is real. Especially ask anyone who's going through a divorce. Sometimes a kid will pick a parent and that hurts. And also it's normal for children to kind of pick one over the other over time. That is completely normal. It just hurts in the context of like trauma. Another common sign is that they need loyalty, reassurance, emotional withdrawal when they are hurt. Like the parent who ignores their kid for a long time because they chose their mom. Or like, you're gonna like visit me on the weekend, right? Like I'm gonna buy you ice cream. So like you're gonna come back, right? When at the same time, maybe this child is now a teenager and they're building their own life slowly. And it's like, no, dad, I gotta practice for this play I'm in on the weekend. It doesn't mean I don't want to see you, but I have to detach and become my own person. But the parent who is in abandonment trauma will feel this very deeply as like, there we go again, another person who's not going to stick around. It's really complex and deep. Another common sign is difficulty tolerating, I just said it, difficulty tolerating independence. Also, addiction. In the memoir, we see Josh's father go through this process because he separates from his wife. And then he goes through all these signs of abandonment trauma and emotional rigidity. It's survival mode, and it's ride or die. It's black or white. And abandonment trauma often creates either clinging control or avoidant detachment. And both are attachment adaptations for survival.
And finally, there were actually a few questions about financial success and father lineage and how that is affected by the father wound. We're going to have a whole episode on money and the father wound, but I'm just curious from a psychological neuroscience point of view, what you have to say about this.
So there is a psychological link between paternal lineage and achievement. Think, this sounds terrible, but think back to like men inheriting property. It's not the oldest child, it's the first male who will inherit power and decision-making rights over like an estate. Okay. Even if the next male is a child, but there's a capable woman, sister who's there who can make decisions, right? So, okay. So in many family systems, this old school belief still exists, even if we're not consciously aware of it, even if we're not saying it, but it's still there because our parents were programmed by their parents. So it's possible for like 50-year-old old school belief systems to have existed in our childhood. So in many family systems, the father had to be competent, had to have status, and reputation mattered, that external validation. And if paternal approval was conditional, meaning even for this father, their dad only could provide any sense of connection or warmth based on achieving something, or oh, you need to be productive for me to give you a high five, or if you're resting, you're not being productive, you better feel guilty, get up and keep moving, you better keep working, don't be tired, get up. And struggling with self-worth that is independent of success. So like my self-worth is deeply enmeshed with my ability to succeed in life. So let's say I lose my career. Well, then who do I become? Like what happens with my identity if I was taught that I can only ever be successful? My self-worth disappears. And so this is attachment-driven ambition. Yes, it can lead to success financially or success on however the world defines it, but it can also lead to burnout and depression.
That was absolutely amazing, Dr. Burgos, as always. What final thoughts do you have for us as we wrap this up?
Let's notice the pattern, the deeper neuroscience pattern that many of these fathers had, most likely, such as unprocessed childhood trauma, emotional neglect, no modeling of healthy masculine vulnerability. There may have been high shame in their life that they had to endure. So like the level of shame I'm willing to endure is very little because I don't believe in it. I don't believe in carrying it around. But like our fathers, they had to endure that from the time they were babies and like live with it and like they adapt to high shame. They may have also experienced identity built on survival, low awareness of how their body feels inside, which is like an ability to observe our emotions starting to come up. A lot of times these, our fathers went from 0 to 100 in half a second of anger, and there was no like space to just like breathe, which is what we do now. We have learned in society that that's helpful. And of course, a limited emotional vocabulary. So when children need connection, safety, mirror neurons to help us co-regulate with our parent, a dysregulative parental nervous system can only offer maybe provision, control, some advice, and pressure to achieve. That mismatch creates father wounds. It's also important to understand that as we learn about this, it doesn't excuse behavior. Trauma explanation is not permission to have done everything that happened or to do more of it. And you can understand now that my father was limited and still say, and that hurt deeply. Both can coexist. The nervous system healing, when we start to understand this through neuroscience, what we see is the questions we ask start to very slowly shift. At first, it's like, why didn't he love me properly? And I'm hoping that by the end of the father wound episodes, maybe we can start to ask, why did his nervous system never learn to do this? And then eventually, what does my nervous system need now? And that is a shift in the locus of control from being attached to our father to now being internal of us giving ourselves what we need. And it no longer has to mean anything about us in relation to our father's actions. Now, one final, of course, deeply truthful and as gently as possible. Many fathers love and loved deeply. But love expressed through survival can look like control, withdrawal, comparison, silence, workaholism, substance use, pride, emotional distance. But now we know love and nervous system capacity are not the same thing. He may have loved you. He may not have had the nervous system to show it safely. And your worth was never dependent on his nervous system capacity.
I hope that we can all really feel that perspective shift because I felt that in my body.
I'm so glad. And in the process of me, preparing for this, I was healing my father wounds too. It's like it goes on, and I know a lot of the science, but there's always one more thing to untangle. One more thing to untangle. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Burgos, thank you so much for walking us through these questions and helping us to gain a bit more understanding and insight and healing our father wound. You are amazing as always. And I always ask, do you feel complete?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for allowing me to heal with you and with everyone listening.
You're always a gem. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seekers, I hope you got as much clarity and healing from that conversation with Dr. DeMarty Burgos as I did. And if this episode inspired you, please like, share, or follow the show so more seekers can find these conversations and get the perspective shift they need to heal. Until next time, hang in there, seekers.